They told me to calm down. But let me ask you, how exactly do you stay calm when a man in a costume, flashing a badge you know deep down can't be real, is pounding on your door at sunrise, hollering about government codes that don't exist? I'm talking about 7 a.m., half the neighborhood barely awake, and every window is dark except mine, while this guy, Brad Henderson, is threatening to fine me for breaking rules I've never heard of. You see those wild HOA horror stories online. People laugh, but to us, this was just Tuesday, and looking back, that was the morning something in me snapped. Would you have opened the door, or just hid behind the curtains and hoped he'd disappear? Tell me, because if I'd known where things would end up, I might have handled it all differently. We moved to Oak Ridge Estates thinking we were running away from chaos. My son Will, a federal marshal, was on grief leave after his wife, my daughter-in-law, passed from cancer. The hope was that this little piece of suburbia, with its white fences and carefully mowed lawns, would offer some peace, give him room to breathe, maybe let both of us remember what quiet felt like. I'll bet your neighborhood doesn't come with this kind of drama, right? But if I've learned anything, it's that trouble has a way of finding you, and this time, it had a fake badge and a gun. 3 days after we finished unpacking, Brad was at our door, official badge, fake uniform, and that gun, which I now think was the only real thing about him. Government safety inspection, he announced, sounding just important enough to make you hesitate before pushing back. Need to verify compliance with federal housing standards. He said jurisdiction, like he was the king of it. When I asked to see his credentials, his hand drifted right over that gun, like he wanted to remind me who was in charge. You sure you want to obstruct official business? He said, and I could feel the threat humming underneath every word. I wasn't sure if I was paranoid, but something about him was all wrong. Too aggressive, too polished, too eager to bully. That's when Will showed up, standing quiet beside me, his face still raw from loss, but his eyes sharp with the kind of attention only years in law enforcement can train into a man. He sized Brad up, calm and professional, like he was back on the job, and the silence that stretched between them was thick as honey. What agency issued your authority? Will asked, and in that voice you can only get from experience. Brad barely missed a beat. Partnerships with Homeland Security give me jurisdiction over residential compliance issues. Got a problem with that. He phrased it like a dare, not an answer. And I'll be honest, I was still processing the fact that apparently my sleepy neighborhood needed federal oversight. I should have known, federal agents don't show up at dawn for unannounced inspections. But Brad left us with a $300 citation for inspection obstruction, and the way Will went quiet told me something deeper was spinning in his mind. Later, he said, "Dad, that badge is fake. The gun might be real, but nothing else about him is." He pointed out details, wrong font, cheap construction, subtle mistakes a civilian wouldn't catch, but a marshal would spot instantly. Should we call the police? I asked, already guessing it wouldn't be that simple. He says he has partnerships. He might have local protection. A complaint could just disappear. So we'll shift it into planning mode, laying out a strategy for building evidence that couldn't be ignored or buried. That night, Donna from next door whispered her own story over the fence. Fines that changed with Brad's mood, threats about immigration to scare the new families, elderly neighbors too frightened to speak up. He's got someone at the station who looks the other way, she said, eyes darting nervously. The resignation in her voice told me this wasn't new. Will, back in the groove, said, "I'm going to build a case, but it has to be unofficial until it's bulletproof." I worried about him getting in trouble, but he reassured me. Citizens can document crimes against themselves. When we're ready, I'll know who to call. Watching him pull out his laptop, creating a case file like he'd done 100 times before, I felt both comforted and cold. This wasn't going to be just a simple dispute. Our mornings settled into a pattern. Coffee, silence, the picture of my late wife catching the early sun. Will, instead of resting, dove deep into mapping Brad's patrols, tracking interactions, even setting up makeshift surveillance like he was back on assignment. "Dad, this isn't random," he finally said, eyes on a chart of Brad's movements. "This is organized intimidation. He's using psychological tactics. Not just a bully, but someone trained to exploit fear." He started asking Brad pointed questions. Badge number, agency verification, exact statutes. Brad's answers grew desperate, his bluster shaky. When Will pressed harder, Brad shifted, brought back up, tried to intimidate with numbers instead of just force. New residents need to learn how things work. Tim, Brad's sidekick, whispered, clearly unconvinced but too scared to break ranks. But Will wasn't just gathering evidence. He was watching Brad evolve. He's learning from our resistance, Will told me, adjusting tactics, recruiting bystanders, refining his documentation. That's not amateur work. That's professional adaptation. It was chilling. Will sent Brad an email requesting a public meeting about safety, knowing Brad would either dodge and lose legitimacy or accept and risk exposure. When Brad agreed, Will smiled. Now watch him try to go legit. He'll crumble under the spotlight. It all came to a head one day when Brad arrived with Tim and two unfamiliar guys in tactical vests, ready for another compliance audit. I stepped out, cool as I could manage, called him Officer Henderson, just loud enough to let the crowd know I was skeptical. He got aggressive fast, but Will was ready. As neighbors gathered, Will calmly demanded ID. Brad pulled his gun, shouting about citizens' arrest for impersonating a federal officer. The irony was almost laughable, a fake agent threatening a real marshal. The tension peaked, phones out everywhere, and in one slow move, Will lifted his shirt to show his badge. Real gold and silver, the federal eagle catching sunlight. No mistaking the real thing for Brad's dime store prop. The silence was absolute. Brad's face twisted through confusion, fear, denial. Fake. That's fake, he screamed, but you could feel the crowd's disbelief melting into realization. Police sirens howled in the distance. Tim dropped his weapon, and the other two guys started backing away. The Martinez kids peeked from behind their parents. Mrs. Patterson cried, relief streaming down her face. Within minutes, local cops confirmed Will's badge, his status as a federal marshal. Brad, who'd ruled through fear and confusion, was suddenly a suspect, gun trembling in his hand, grasping for legal loopholes he'd only half understood. Will laid out months of evidence: fraud, extortion, impersonation, threats. Brad's protests, entrapment. "I've got federal protection," sounded pathetic, even to the rookie officers who now treated him as a dangerous criminal, not an official. When they snapped cuffs on him, he was still muttering about fake badges, but everyone could see the difference now. The fallout was quick and dramatic. Federal agents swept in, not just for Brad, but for a network of fraudsters using identical scams in multiple states. Turns out, Brad was part of something much bigger, a criminal franchise operation using psychological profiling, digital surveillance, and fake government docs to target the vulnerable. Tim, faced with serious charges, spilled everything: recruitment through shady online forums, payment in crypto, training in social engineering. They found encrypted databases, victim lists, AI-generated credentials, and instructions for evading federal detection. Will's documentation, behavioral analysis, surveillance logs, victim interviews became the keystone for a nationwide bust. Federal agents linked Brad's little operation to dozens of others across 3 countries. The head of the whole thing, a guy named Viktor Klov, former Soviet intelligence, was arrested in Vancouver, his tech-packed compound raided by Canadian Mounties. In Mexico, printing presses making fake documents were seized. In the U.S., local partners, corrupt officials, even HOA board members were indicted. In total, thousands of victims, elderly, immigrants, military families, finally got the justice they deserved. Back in Oak Ridge Estates, everything changed. Brad's property, once headquarters for his scam, became a community garden. The fines he'd squeezed out of scared neighbors were repaid, plus compensation for trauma. Mrs. Patterson could finally afford her medication. The Martinez family put a down payment on a home, and the Johnson kids put up the wildest playground the street had ever seen. Our new HOA president, Donna, mounted Brad's confiscated badge and Will's commendation on the wall, under a plaque that reads, "The difference between false authority and real protection." Will went back to work, training agents to spot and dismantle organized fraud. Federal laws changed. Now, HOAs nationwide face stricter oversight, and anyone can report suspected scams through a national hotline. More than any medal or recognition, Will cherishes the thank you letters from families he helped save. And every morning, as I drink coffee on my porch and watch the sun glint off his badge during his visits, I remember the way fear turned to courage in our neighborhood. How a quiet man's refusal to accept a fake badge protected thousands, not just here, but across borders and time zones. And maybe that's the lesson. Fear grows in silence, but courage, once spoken, can reshape the world. So, if you made it this far, I want to hear from you. What would you have done? Where do you draw the line between keeping your head down and fighting back for justice? Drop your thoughts below. Let's talk about it. Because stories like this only end when good people refuse to stay silent.